A German shepherd waits in the dry wind of Silver Mesa, ears high, nose sharp to the dust. At the chapel door, a bride in white lace pauses, her veil trembling as a faint cry drifts from the hog pens beyond the fence. Behind a sagging tarp at the lonely farm, a boy is tied with rope, his wrists raw, his voice cracked by fear. One word slips out, small but devastating. "Don't send me back." To him. No one thought a wedding could shatter before the vows. No one thought the groom himself could hide such a secret. But the dog remembered the scent, and the bride remembered her courage. What happened next shook the entire town and proved that truth can burn brighter than lies. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe no child or animal should be left in the dark, hit subscribe. Silver Mesa lay beneath a sky of restless copper, the desert sun leaning heavy on the town, as though testing its endurance. The wind blew dry, lifting grit from the red dirt streets and smearing it against the windows of shops that had stood for 3 generations. Heat shimmered off the corrugated roofs of the feed store and the single diner, the kind of heat that pressed into your chest until every breath felt like inhaling smoke. It was not the gentle warmth of summer, but the stern, punishing furnace of New Mexico's high country, where even joy had to prove itself against the elements. The chapel at the edge of town, painted white but faded to cream by decades of dust storms, had been decorated with paper flowers, strings of lanterns, and mismatched chairs borrowed from neighbors. This was no grand cathedral. It was a place where prayers were whispered, funerals carried the silence of entire families, and weddings became the rare moments of color stitched into the town's quilt. Eleanor Hayes stood at the threshold of this chapel, her veil trembling slightly in the dry gusts. She was 27, tall and willowy, her figure graceful in a way that suggested resilience more than fragility. Her skin was pale but warmed with freckles across her shoulders, and her hair, a chestnut brown with hints of auburn when the sun caught it, was pinned into a crown of braids. There was softness in her green eyes, the softness of someone who had known loneliness and refused to let it turn to bitterness. Raised by her grandmother after her parents died in a highway accident when she was only 8, Eleanor had learned early that grief was not something you conquered, but something you carried, like a stone in the pocket that could weigh you down or remind you to walk carefully. Today she carried hope, the kind that made her lips tremble into nervous smiles. Michael Vaughn waited at the altar inside, standing straight in his navy blue suit, a silver tie knotted with precise care. He was 38, his body lean and taut from years of patrol duty, with broad shoulders and arms that carried the strength of habit more than vanity. His face was angular, with a square jaw shadowed faintly by stubble. He had not quite managed to shave clean that morning. His dark hair was neatly combed, but a streak of gray at the temples gave him the appearance of maturity. To most in town, Michael was a figure of respect, a police officer who had once been widowed young when his first wife died in a car crash, a man who had carried that loss with silent dignity. He was known for his calm voice when diffusing bar fights, his steady hand in storms, and the way he helped elderly neighbors fix fences on weekends. Yet behind his blue-gray eyes lingered something harder, like steel too often hammered, an unspoken temper that could flicker beneath the charm. Few noticed, or perhaps none dared to name it. The townsfolk filled the pews, fanning themselves with folded programs. Old Mrs. Letty Marlowe, 68, the retired schoolteacher with sharp eyes behind cat-eye glasses, whispered to her sister about how radiant Eleanor looked. Letty was petite, her silver bob framing a face etched by years of discipline in classrooms where she had wrangled generations of restless children. Near the back sat Pedro Jimenez, a wiry man in his 70s with sun-creased skin and a stoop from decades of ranch work. Pedro wore his one good hat, holding it respectfully in his lap, his dark eyes thoughtful as if weighing something unsaid. Across the aisle, young Sarah Quinland, the town's dispatcher, compact and wiry in her late 30s, with fox-like features and hair pinned tight, smiled faintly. She had the habit of scanning every room as though it were a crime scene, a reflex born from years of handling emergencies over the radio. All had come to celebrate, to believe in love reborn, and to see a man they respected rebuild his life with a woman they admired. Outside, near the fence line, a dog stood watching. Bandit, a German shepherd of 7 years, sable-coated with a dark mask over his face and tan legs, had the air of a soldier left on guard. His body was lean, his ears erect but sometimes dipping with a kind of weary softness. Scars marred one flank, souvenirs from a fight with coyotes when he was younger, but his amber eyes were bright with alertness. Bandit belonged to no one in particular now. He had been abandoned after his former owner left town. Yet he had lingered at the edges of Silver Mesa, living off scraps and kindness. Children loved him, and he often appeared near the schoolyard or the diner, sitting quietly as though supervising. Today, inexplicably, Bandit had padded toward the chapel and stopped at the hog pens that belonged to the old Vaughn farm adjacent to the property. His nose lifted to the wind, catching something no one else noticed. Inside, the minister cleared his throat, and the music began on a battered piano. Eleanor took her first steps down the aisle, her gown whispering across the wooden floorboards. Michael's lips curved into a smile, perfect, rehearsed, the kind of smile that disarmed even the most suspicious hearts. As she drew closer, her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Child, don't just look at a man's smile. Watch his eyes. They tell you what his soul owes the world." For a fleeting instant, Eleanor caught a hardness in Michael's gaze, but the thought was drowned in the applause of neighbors and the rush of her own heartbeat. The vows were read, the rings glinted, and for a moment the town believed in the story being written. A policeman who had endured loss, a bride who had carried loneliness, now weaving their lives together under God's light. Yet outside, where the wind pressed against tarps and rusted wire, a faint sound threaded through the desert heat, a child's cry, fragile and aching. Bandit pricked his ears, paced near the hog pen, and whined low in his throat. None in the chapel heard it. Their ears were tuned to music and promise. But the desert carried the sound like a secret, and those who chose to listen would never hear the town the same way again. The ceremony ended in applause, and Eleanor and Michael walked hand in hand down the aisle, showered with paper petals. Townsfolk laughed. Old Mrs. Marlowe dabbed her eyes. Pedro muttered a blessing, and Sarah noted the time for her own record-keeping. Outside, the air felt heavier, though no cloud marred the sky. As the newlyweds posed for photographs beneath the chapel's arch, Eleanor caught sight of Bandit by the fence, his eyes fixed on the hog pen, his body taut with unease. For reasons she could not explain, a shiver ran along her spine, though the sun still burned mercilessly overhead. The town of Silver Mesa celebrated, unaware that beneath the tidy vows and polished smiles, a darker chapter waited to be read. Michael clasped Eleanor's hand tighter than necessary, the pressure of his grip hidden behind the guise of affection. In his silence there was something possessive, something brittle. No one spoke of it. No one saw. And yet, just beyond the laughter, the cry of a child still echoed, faint but persistent, like a warning stitched into the wind. The celebration spilled outside the chapel, townsfolk fanning themselves against the merciless desert air. Paper flowers fluttered in the breeze like fragile butterflies, and the chatter of neighbors rose above the faint wheeze of the old organ. Eleanor smiled dutifully at each handshake, each congratulation, though her mind drifted, tugged by an unease she could not name. Her gown clung to her back with sweat, and beneath the lace she felt her heartbeat quicken, not only with the thrill of marriage, but with a strange whispering sense that something waited just beyond the laughter. She excused herself from a circle of women praising her veil, and stepped toward the edge of the yard where the chapel's fence sagged. It was there that the sound found her, thin, trembling, breaking across the rustle of mesquite leaves, the unmistakable cry of a child. Eleanor froze, her green eyes widening, the music of the reception dulled in her ears, replaced by that fragile note. She turned her head sharply, scanning the horizon, and then she saw Bandit, the German shepherd she had noticed earlier, pacing back and forth near the weathered hog pens of the old Vaughan farm. His sable coat shimmered under the sun, his ears rigid, and his tail stiff with warning. He whined, glanced toward Eleanor, then back at the tarp that drooped over the pen, as though urging her to follow. Drawn by something deeper than curiosity, Eleanor gathered her gown and crossed the dusty ground. Each step seemed louder than the last, her shoes crunching against gravel, her veil dragging like a banner behind her. The closer she came, the clearer the cry became. Hoarse, uneven, the sound of a throat rubbed raw by fear. She hesitated at the fence line, the stench of old straw and animal waste reaching her, and for a moment the desert's heat felt like a weight pressing her down. Bandit pressed his nose against the gap in the tarp, growling low, then looked up at her with amber eyes that burned with urgency. With trembling fingers, Eleanor lifted the edge of the tarp. At first, the darkness within blinded her, her pupils shrinking from the sun's glare. Then shapes emerged, slats of broken wood, heaps of damp straw, and in the corner, a boy curled into himself, wrists bound with coarse rope. He could not have been more than 8, his frame small and thin, his skin pale beneath streaks of dust. His hair was dark, unkempt, sticking to his forehead in damp clumps, and his cheeks were streaked with dried tears. His eyes, hazel flecked with gold, met hers, wide with terror, but also with a spark of desperate hope. Eleanor gasped, the sound torn from her chest. "Oh, dear God," she whispered, reaching toward him. The boy flinched, shrinking further into the corner, his lips trembling. When he spoke, the words were scarcely audible, rasped from a throat parched and sore. "Please, don't send me back to him." Her heart constricted painfully. "To him?" she echoed softly, but the boy pressed his face into his knees, refusing to say more. Bandit pushed through the gap, moving between Eleanor and the boy as though to assure him she meant no harm. The dog licked the boy's cheek once, then turned to Eleanor, barking sharply, a single sound that seemed to demand action. Eleanor forced her hand steady, fumbling at the rope that bit into the boy's wrists. The fibers were rough, hardened with sweat and grime, and she had to tug with all her strength to loosen the knots. At last the rope fell free, and the boy's small hands collapsed into his lap, raw with angry red marks. Eleanor slipped off her lace gloves and wrapped them gently around his wrists to shield them. "You're safe now," she murmured, though the words felt fragile, too light against the weight of his fear. The boy leaned forward hesitantly, as though testing whether her arms were real, then let himself fall into her embrace. He smelled of straw, sweat, and dust, but beneath it Eleanor sensed something achingly human, the scent of a child who had been left too long in silence. She held him tightly, rocking once, like her grandmother had rocked her when nightmares woke her at 8 years old. "What's your name?" she asked softly. He hesitated, his lips dry. "Aiden," he whispered. The name struck Eleanor like a stone in the chest. She had heard it once before, spoken in hushed tones in town gossip. Michael had an older son from his first marriage, but the story was vague. The boy had gone to live with relatives after his mother died, far away from Silver Mesa. Eleanor had never pressed for details, trusting Michael's calm explanations. Now, with Aiden trembling in her arms, truth and lie tangled painfully. A rush of footsteps made her head jerk up. A neighbor, Nora Pierce, came running from the direction of the chapel. Nora was 29, tall and slim with a runner's build, her dark hair pulled into a bun and glasses perched low on her nose. She was known for her meticulous ways. She worked part-time as a social services aide, filing forms with relentless precision. Today she wore a faded blue dress that clung in the heat, her sandals raising puffs of dust as she hurried. "Eleanor!" she called, her voice sharp with alarm. "People are looking for you! What happened?" Eleanor rose halfway, pulling Aiden behind her. "There's a child. He's hurt, tied up. He says he doesn't want to go back to his father." Her voice cracked at the word. Nora's eyes widened, and she crouched quickly, her professional instinct overtaking her shock. She reached out a hand toward Aiden but stopped short when Bandit growled low, his hackles rising. Eleanor touched the dog's shoulder gently. "It's all right, boy," she whispered. Bandit subsided, though his gaze never left Nora. Nora's voice softened, pitched low. "Aiden, sweetheart, can you come with us? We're going to help you." The boy clung tighter to Eleanor's dress, shaking his head. Eleanor stroked his hair, her own heart pounding. "It's all right, darling. We'll keep you safe." For a long moment, only the cicadas hummed. Then Aiden lifted his face, eyes brimming, and gave the smallest of nods. Eleanor felt the shift, like a door opening just a crack, enough to let in light. From the chapel, voices called Eleanor's name, cheerful and unsuspecting. Michael's deep baritone rose above them, steady and commanding, the voice of a man used to being obeyed. Eleanor's stomach turned cold. She tightened her hold on Aiden and whispered fiercely, "Stay quiet. Please." Bandit pressed close, a silent sentinel, his ears flicking at every sound. Eleanor's mind spun. The town believed her husband-to-be was a man of integrity, a pillar of strength. Yet here, hidden behind rotting wood and sagging tarp, was evidence of something unspeakable. She looked down at Aiden, his wrists raw, his lips cracked, his voice still echoing. "Don't send me back." The world she thought she was stepping into as a bride tilted beneath her feet, and the vows she had spoken only minutes before felt like fragile glass shattering against the desert's red dirt. Eleanor's pulse thundered in her ears as she clutched Aiden close, her gown dust-stained from kneeling in the hog pen. Nora Pierce crouched beside her, eyes sharp behind her glasses, whispering hurried instructions about getting the boy water, documenting injuries, reporting. Yet Eleanor barely heard her. What echoed in her mind was Aiden's plea. "Don't send me back," and the way he shrank even at the sound of Michael's voice drifting from the chapel. She wanted desperately to believe it was a mistake, that Michael could never be the monster painted in a child's fear. But something in Aiden's eyes, the haunted gleam of a boy who had endured too many nights in silence, would not allow denial. Bandit paced before the opening, ears pinned back, tail rigid. He had stationed himself like a sentinel, growling low whenever the boy flinched at sounds of footsteps. Eleanor stroked Aiden's tangled hair, whispering soothingly, "It's all right, darling. You're safe here." Her words felt thin, like paper shields against a storm. Nora produced a small flask from her bag, unscrewing the cap. "It's only water," she said gently, holding it toward Aidan. The boy's hands trembled so violently he spilled half the flask, but he gulped greedily until his chest heaved. Eleanor watched, her own throat tightening at the sight of a child so starved of the simplest kindness. The boy shifted, then reached beneath the straw pile where he had been huddled. His small hand drew out a ragged notebook, its corners chewed, pages soft with grime. He looked at Eleanor, lips pressed tight, then offered it with a hesitant shake. Eleanor opened it cautiously, her gloved fingers brushing fragile paper. The handwriting was uneven, letters marching like frightened soldiers across the lines. Simple drawings filled the margins, crooked stars, little stick figures, the outline of a house with doors barred. She read the words slowly, her stomach tightening. "He says I'm too weak. He says I have to learn. He locks the door. I am brave. Bandit stays with me." Another page. "He gets angry when I talk. He doesn't want me to say Mom's name. I write it here so I don't forget." Eleanor's hand shook. She turned another page, her breath catching. "Dad says if I tell anyone, no one will believe me. He says the town thinks he is good, but I know the truth." The letters trailed off into smudges where tears had blurred the pencil. Her vision blurred. She pressed a hand to her lips, struggling to keep composure. Michael. Her Michael, the man who had smiled so tenderly at the altar, was written here not as a protector, but as a tormentor. She looked again at Aidan, the rope burns on his wrists, the hollow cheeks, the fear etched into every muscle. Denial no longer had ground to stand on. The veil that had cloaked her hopes fell away, leaving only a harsh, blinding truth. Nora leaned closer, voice urgent. "Eleanor, this notebook, it's evidence. We need to keep it safe. If this is true—" She stopped, her gaze flicking towards the chapel where laughter still rose. Her jaw tightened. "We'll need to act carefully. He's respected here. People may not want to believe." Eleanor's mind reeled. Respected. Yes, Michael wore his uniform like armor, his voice calm, his manners impeccable. Neighbors praised him for helping mend fences, for steadying quarrels, for carrying grief with dignity when his wife had died. But beneath that veneer lay the cruelty now carved into his son's skin. She wanted to scream, to tear the illusion away from the town's eyes. But fear coiled in her chest. If Michael sensed discovery, what would he do? Bandit barked once, sharp, and Eleanor flinched. A shadow passed over the fence. A man approached from the road, a deputy called Miguel Ortega. He was in his early 30s, square-shouldered and solid, with a calm face and thick black hair combed neatly. Miguel was known as a steady officer, the kind who listened more than he spoke, who preferred to settle disputes with patience rather than force. He had grown up in Silver Mesa, son of a mechanic, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged. Today he wore his tan sheriff's uniform, sweat darkening patches beneath the arms, his expression cautious. "Mrs. Vaughn?" he called, already naming Eleanor by her married title. "Folks are asking for you. Michael wondered where you'd gone." His brown eyes flicked to Nora, then narrowed at the sight of Aidan half hidden in Eleanor's skirt. "What's this?" Nora rose swiftly, intercepting him. "Deputy, listen. This boy needs protection. I'll explain, but not here. Please, lower your voice." Miguel studied her, then Eleanor, his gaze steady. "That's his son, isn't it?" His voice was low but firm. Eleanor's heart thumped painfully. She nodded once, unable to speak. Miguel's jaw flexed. He had known Michael since academy days, had respected him as a fellow officer. To suggest Michael was guilty of cruelty was unthinkable. Yet the evidence stood before him. A boy scarred, a notebook filled with trembling words. He exhaled slowly. "All right," he said. "We'll keep this quiet for now. But Eleanor, you need to be careful." She clutched Aidan tighter, whispering, "I can't go back to him. Not after this." Miguel's gaze softened for a moment. "Then don't," he said simply. "We'll figure the rest out." The voices from the chapel drew nearer. Michael himself emerged, tall and commanding in his suit, his gray at the temples gleaming in the sun. His smile stretched wide as he greeted neighbors, his hand lifting in a casual wave. But when his eyes landed on Eleanor, standing by the hog pen with Nora, Miguel, Aidan, and Bandit, his smile faltered for the briefest second. Eleanor caught it, a flash of steel behind the mask, a predator startled that prey had strayed beyond his reach. She forced, her breathing steady, pressing Aidan's head against her shoulder. The notebook lay hidden in the folds of her gown. For the first time since the vows, Eleanor felt clarity. She was not the bride stepping into safety, but the witness standing at the edge of revelation. And as Michael's footsteps crunched closer on the red dirt, she understood that the life she had promised was not the one she had received. The veil was gone, and in its place stood truth, harsh and undeniable. The sun sank low behind the mesa, staining the sky in bruised hues of copper and violet. The town's laughter from the chapel had faded into the distance, leaving only the rasp of cicadas and the crunch of gravel beneath carriage wheels. Michael's house waited at the end of Cottonwood Lane, a 2-story farmhouse freshly painted white with blue shutters, standing like a polished mask against the wilderness. Tonight it was meant to be a sanctuary for a new marriage, a place where vows would be sealed by quiet intimacy. Yet as Eleanor stepped through the doorway, Aidan clinging to her skirt and Bandit padding close at her heel, she felt as though she had crossed the threshold into a cage. The foyer smelled faintly of lemon polish, the wood floors gleaming from hours of preparation. Bouquets of wildflowers, yellow marigolds and lavender sprigs lined the entry table, their scent too sweet, as if desperate to smother any trace of truth. Aidan's small fingers dug into Eleanor's gown, his hazel eyes darting nervously at every shadow. Bandit stayed low, his muscular body tense, ears pricked forward, growling under his breath whenever Michael shifted too close. Michael closed the door behind them with a deliberate slowness. He stood tall, broad-shouldered, his navy suit jacket removed now, leaving only a white dress shirt rolled at the sleeves. The top button undone revealed the strong column of his neck, but there was no ease in him. His square jaw flexed, the faint stubble catching the lamplight, and his gray-blue eyes glittered like cold stone. He smiled faintly, but it was the kind of smile that reached nowhere near the eyes. "Well," he said, voice low and measured, "this isn't how I imagined our wedding night." He moved past Eleanor into the living room, where a fire had been laid, unlit in the hearth. He poured himself a glass of whiskey from a decanter waiting on the mantel, his movements calm, practiced, as though every gesture was part of a performance. "But we adapt, don't we, Eleanor?" Eleanor straightened, her heart racing. "Michael, we need to talk. About Aidan." Her voice trembled, but she forced strength into each syllable. Michael swirled the amber liquid in his glass, watching it like a man considering the weight of fate. "Aidan," he repeated, his tone almost dismissive. "The boy has always been difficult, soft. He needs structure, discipline." He turned his gaze on her, and for the first time Eleanor saw the hardness fully unveiled, the glint of cruelty no longer masked by charm. "You saw the way he hides, the way he whines. That's what happens when a child is allowed to be weak. I'm correcting him. That's what a father does." Eleanor's stomach twisted. Correction. You tied him up in a hog pen, Michael. He's a child, not a criminal. Michael's expression sharpened. He set the glass down with a thud that echoed through the room. You think you know what raising a boy takes? You, who's never had a child of your own. His voice rose, clipped with derision. His mother coddled him until she died. I won't watch him grow into another burden on this world. He'll be strong, or he'll be broken until he learns. Aiden whimpered softly behind Eleanor, and Bandit surged forward, a deep growl vibrating through his chest. The dog planted himself between the child and Michael, teeth bared just enough to gleam in the lamplight. Michael's lip curled in disdain. That mutt, he muttered, always in the way, should have been put down years ago. Eleanor dropped a hand to Bandit's head, feeling the tense muscles quiver beneath her palm. Her voice, though trembling, rang with conviction. No, he's the only one who has protected Aiden, the only one who hasn't failed him. Michael's eyes flashed, a dangerous spark. He took a step forward, looming over Eleanor. He was not a tall man by accident. His height of 6 feet and his lean, corded frame had always given him an edge of intimidation. His presence was suffocating now, filling the room with menace. Careful, wife, he said softly, the word twisting into a threat. You're stepping into matters you don't understand. Eleanor met his gaze, green eyes blazing through fear clawed at her ribs. I understand enough. I've seen the rope burns. I've read his notebook. She pulled the small, ragged journal from her gown, holding it like a talisman. Michael's face went white, then flushed crimson. For the first time, his calm cracked, his breath catching in a hiss. You shouldn't have that, he growled. His voice deepened, the mask slipping fully away. You don't know what damage you'll cause. Do you want to destroy my career, my reputation? This town needs me, they respect me, and you, he jabbed a finger toward her chest. You'll stand by me, or you'll be nothing. A silence thick as smoke filled the room. Aiden pressed his face into Eleanor's gown, trembling. Bandit snarled, the sound low and primal, refusing to retreat. Eleanor clutched the boy closer, whispering a prayer under her breath. Lord, guide me. Show me a way through this darkness. Michael exhaled, forcing his anger back under the surface. He picked up his whiskey again, his hand steady once more. We'll speak no more of this tonight, he said with chilling calm. You'll see, Eleanor. In time you'll understand why I do what I do. It's for the boy's good, for our family's good. He drained the glass, then set it down with finality. Now go upstairs. Rest. Tomorrow we begin our life together properly. Eleanor did not move. She knew, with a certainty that pierced deeper than any vow, that she had married not a protector but a tyrant. And as the flames of the lamp flickered across the walls, she clutched Aiden and felt Bandit press against her leg, the three of them forming a fragile bulwark against the man who claimed to be their guardian. The next morning dawned gray over Silver Mesa, the desert sun dimmed by low clouds that threatened rain. The house smelled of cold ashes and lemon polish, but Eleanor felt no warmth in its walls. She moved quietly, keeping Aiden close by her side, his thin frame wrapped in an oversized sweater she had found in one of the trunks. Bandit followed, paws clicking softly on the wood floors, his dark eyes always flicking toward the door, as if he knew danger waited beyond. Michael had already left, or so Eleanor thought, until she found a note pinned neatly to the kitchen counter. His handwriting was precise, angular, and without sentiment. I'll be at the station. Keep the boy in line. We'll talk tonight. Her hand trembled as she folded the note, stuffing it deep into her apron pocket. Each word carried the weight of warning, a reminder that his watchful eyes extended beyond his presence. She couldn't stay silent any longer. Gathering courage, Eleanor led Aidan and Bandit out the back door, walking the long dirt lane that wound past cottonwood trees and faded fences. Every step felt like a gamble. If Michael returned unexpectedly, if he saw her gone, suspicion would tighten like a noose. Yet silence was no longer possible. The truth demanded allies. Their first stop was the modest house 3 doors down, painted pale yellow with white shutters that sagged slightly. It belonged to Letty Marlowe, a retired schoolteacher in her late 60s. Letty was a petite woman with wiry arms, sharp gray eyes behind cat-eye glasses, and a silver bob that framed her face with stern precision. Years of commanding classrooms had given her a brisk, no-nonsense manner, but beneath that steel lay a loyalty to her neighbors. When Eleanor knocked, Letty opened the door with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Back so soon, dear?" she said, scanning Eleanor's pale face, then noticing Aidan clutching her gown. The boy's wrists were half hidden by the sweater sleeves, but Letty's sharp eyes missed nothing. She pursed her lips. "Come in. Quickly." Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon tea and chalk dust. Shelves of books lined the walls, old grammar guides and story collections stacked neatly. Eleanor sat at the table, Aidan close beside her, Bandit lying under the chair like a shadow. She whispered the truth. Fragments at first, then more clearly. The notebook, the hog pen, Michael's chilling words about discipline. Letty's eyes grew harder with each detail, her knuckles whitening around the teacup she held. "I knew something wasn't right," Letty muttered. "That boy of his always looked pale, too quiet. But Michael wore that uniform like armor, and folks don't like to question their heroes." She sighed, then straightened, determination flashing in her gaze. "Well, he's not beyond question now. And you're not alone, Eleanor." By mid-morning, Eleanor found herself walking further into town, Aidan tucked close under her arm. She had arranged a quiet meeting at the small Adobe clinic on Main Street, where Dr. Irene Caldwell waited. Caldwell was in her early 50s, tall and spare, her auburn hair threaded with silver, tied back in a low knot. She wore navy scrubs beneath a white coat, her calm blue eyes holding the steady patience of someone who had seen every kind of pain. In the exam room, Caldwell worked gently, examining Aidan with practiced care. She spoke softly, explaining each step so the boy would not startle. "I'm going to look at your arms now, sweetheart. Just hold still. You're safe here." Her hands moved with precision, noting the rope burns, the fading bruises in shades of yellow and green, the small scars that spoke of repeated neglect. She dictated in clinical language, her voice firm, but her expression betrayed sorrow. "These are not new," Caldwell said, meeting Eleanor's gaze. "Some are weeks old. This child has endured sustained harm. I'll document everything." She took photographs with a small camera, each flash a harsh reminder of reality. Aidan winced at the light, clutching Bandit's ear as comfort. The dog pressed close, a living shield, his steady presence anchoring the boy's fragile calm. Eleanor swallowed hard, her hands clasped together. "If Michael finds out," Caldwell's expression hardened. "He won't. Not before the proper authorities see this. I'll file my report with Child Protective Services. They'll act quickly once they see this evidence. But Eleanor, you must prepare yourself. Michael won't surrender quietly." That afternoon, Nora Pierce from CPS met Eleanor in Letty's sitting room. Nora was tall and slim, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun, glasses perched neatly on her nose. At 29, she carried herself with the calm determination of someone who had learned patience from experience. Her voice was measured as she spread documents across the table. "There were reports before," Nora said, pointing to files with red lines marked insufficient evidence. "A teacher, a neighbor, even an anonymous call, But without proof, cases were closed. Now, with Caldwell's photos and Aiden's notebook, we have what we need. Eleanor, if you're willing, I can initiate an emergency safety plan." Eleanor nodded, though fear coiled inside her chest. "I'll do whatever it takes. He can't go back to Michael." Nora leaned forward, her gaze steady. "Then we'll move carefully. You'll stay here for tonight. Tomorrow I'll file the petition with the court. But be warned, Michael will fight. He's built his reputation on strength and service. He'll try to paint you as unstable. You need to be ready for that." The words sank heavy into Eleanor's heart. Michael's voice still rang in her ears. "If you betray me, you'll lose everything." She clutched Aiden closer, whispering into his hair, "You won't lose me, I promise." Night fell heavy over Silver Mesa, the air thick, with the promise of rain. Back at the farmhouse, Michael returned to find the rooms empty of his wife and son. His jaw tightened as he poured another glass of whiskey, pacing the parlor like a predator denied. He opened the drawer where the notebook had been hidden, finding it gone. His lips curled into a snarl. When Eleanor and Aiden slipped back into the house near midnight, Letty walking with them as far as the lane, Michael stood waiting in the dark. The lamplight cast his face in harsh shadows, the edges of his square jaw cut like stone. He said nothing at first, only watching Eleanor as she set Aiden to bed and Bandit lay across the boy's doorway. At last, Michael spoke, his voice quiet, lethal. "If you ever take him away again, Eleanor, if you ever go behind my back, you'll regret it. Do you understand?" His eyes gleamed like cold steel. "I built this life. I protect this town. You're nothing without me. Betray me, and you'll lose it all." Eleanor's hands shook, but she met his gaze. "I'd rather lose everything," she whispered, "than lose Aiden." For a moment, silence reigned. Bandit growled low from the hallway, the sound a steady promise. Michael's face twisted, then smoothed back into its mask of calm. "We'll see," he said, retreating into the shadows of the house. And in that moment, Eleanor understood. She was no longer a bride, but a soldier in a war she had not chosen, and the battlefield was her own home. The courthouse in Silver Mesa stood like a relic of ambition, its pale sandstone walls weathered by desert winds, yet still crowned with columns too grand for the small town. On the morning of the preliminary hearing, the air outside was heavy with dust and whispers. Farmers in worn denim and shopkeepers in pressed shirts filled the benches, drawn by curiosity and scandal. A police officer on trial was not something their town had ever witnessed. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and old paper. The ceiling fans spun lazily, pushing warm air in circles. Eleanor sat at the wooden bench reserved for witnesses, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She wore a simple navy dress, her auburn hair pinned back, green eyes shadowed from sleepless nights, but steady with determination. Beside her, Aiden sat small and stiff, clutching the hem of her skirt with one hand and Bandit's ear with the other. The German shepherd lay curled at their feet, his sable coat gleaming under the shafts of light that spilled through the high windows. Michael entered through the side door, flanked by 2 deputies. He wore his full uniform, pressed navy, polished boots, the badge gleaming like a weapon. His face was clean-shaven, his hair combed meticulously, his square jaw set with stoic pride. To the untrained eye, he looked like the image of discipline and honor. He nodded to familiar faces in the crowd, his blue-gray eyes softening into what seemed like gratitude. But Eleanor saw it, the quick flicker of contempt behind the charm, the tightening of his mouth when his gaze brushed Aiden. At the bench sat Judge Rebecca Alden, a tall woman in her early 60s, her silver bob cut sharp at the jaw, her piercing blue eyes surveying the room with practiced calm. She was known for her unyielding standards, a woman who had lost a niece to neglect years ago. That loss had hardened her resolve. When children were involved, she tolerated no deception. On the prosecution side stood Daniel Ward, the county prosecutor. Ward was in his late 40s, sandy-haired, lean, and deliberate in his movements. He wore a navy suit, his tie knotted with precision. His reputation was one of focus. He wasted no words, cutting through noise like a scalpel. Across the aisle sat Richard Kane, Michael's court-appointed defense attorney. Caney was mid-40s, sharp-jawed, his slicked-back black hair gleaming with pomade, his charcoal suit pressed. He was known for aggression, often theatrical in his arguments, though sometimes too eager to posture. The hearing began with formality. The charges of unlawful confinement, child abuse, and endangerment read aloud. Michael stood tall, answering "not guilty" in a voice calm and unwavering. The crowd stirred. Whispers flew. How could a decorated officer, a widower who had raised his son alone, be accused of such cruelty? Caney rose first, painting Michael as a misunderstood father. His voice was firm, practiced. My client is a man of service, a protector of this town. Discipline, yes, perhaps strict, but never abuse. These claims are born of confusion, of grief, of a new wife overwhelmed by responsibility. His words dripped with sympathy, aimed at swaying the crowd. Eleanor's stomach twisted. Ward rose in reply, his expression cool. Discipline is not confinement in a hog pen. Discipline is not rope burns or malnourishment. We will present evidence, photographs, medical records, and the testimony of those who have seen the truth. The first witness was Dr. Irene Caldwell. She walked to the stand in her white coat, tall and spare, auburn hair streaked with silver, her eyes calm but unflinching. She described her examination of Aiden, her voice clinical but laced with compassion. The injuries were consistent with repeated restraint. Rope burns across both wrists, bruising of varying ages, nutritional deficiency, no plausible explanation beyond sustained neglect. Photographs were displayed, projected onto the courtroom screen. Gasps rippled through the benches. Michael stared straight ahead, his jaw clamped tight. Next came Letty Marlowe. Small and wiry, her sharp eyes scanned the courtroom as she sat upright, hands folded neatly. Her voice was steady, unembellished. I heard the boy crying. More than once. I saw him walking with his shoulders hunched like a child who'd learned to hide. And when Eleanor came to me, I saw the truth in her face, and the fear in his eyes. Michael's defense attorney objected, calling it hearsay, but Judge Alden silenced him with a single raised hand. This court recognizes testimony born of direct observation. Then came Eleanor. Her knees shook as she walked to the witness stand, Aiden watching with wide eyes. She swore the oath, her voice breaking slightly, then steadied herself. I believed Michael was a good man. Everyone did. But on the day of our wedding, I found Aiden bound in a hog pen. I saw the rope burns. I read his notebook. She held up the worn pages, marked with smudged letters and crooked stars. These are his words, not mine. The notebook was entered into evidence. Ward read passages aloud. Aiden's words about fear, about being locked away, about a father who demanded silence. Eleanor's eyes burned with tears, but her gaze never left Michael's face. He stared back, his expression shifting from calm to fury, the mask finally cracking. The tension broke when Aiden himself, small and trembling, was asked if he wanted to speak. He clung to Eleanor's hand, but his voice, though thin, carried across the courtroom. He hurt me. He said no one would believe me, but Bandit stayed with me. Bandit kept me alive. The courtroom fell silent. Even the defense attorney lowered his eyes. Bandit, sensing the weight of the moment, lifted his head and let out a low, solemn bark. Judge Alden leaned forward, her expression sharp as steel. "This court has heard enough for today. The evidence is clear." She gestured to the deputies. "Take him!" Michael erupted, his voice booming. "This is a lie! I gave everything to this town! You'll regret this!" His calm facade shattered, revealing the raw rage beneath. He lunged, but deputies seized him, forcing his hands behind his back. The click of handcuffs echoed like a gavel strike. Eleanor sat frozen, her heart pounding as Michael was dragged past her. For a fleeting moment, his eyes locked with hers, cold, burning with hatred. But she did not flinch. She held Aiden close. Bandit pressed against their legs, the three of them a small island of defiance against the storm. The hearing adjourned. Outside, the townspeople whispered again, but this time the tone was different. Shock, disbelief, and the first ripples of truth spreading through Silver Mesa. Eleanor stepped into the sunlight, her son safe in her arms, knowing the battle was far from over, but that the mask had finally fallen. The courthouse doors closed on Michael's shouts, and the echoes lingered in Silver Mesa like a bitter wind. For days afterward, the town buzzed with divided voices. Some still clung to the image of Michael the officer, the widower who had fixed fences and carried himself with dignity. Others whispered the truth, shaken by the evidence, the notebook, the bruises. The wedding that should have bound two lives together had shattered into scandal. But in the ashes of betrayal, Eleanor found herself not broken, but reforged. The farmhouse that Michael had claimed as his fortress stood empty now, a monument to secrets. Eleanor refused to step foot inside again. Instead, she and Aiden stayed with Letty Marlowe, whose yellow-painted home smelled of cinnamon and old chalk. Letty fussed with her spectacles and clucked about tidying up, but beneath her brisk words was a gentleness that surprised Eleanor. "This house is small," Letty said one evening, pouring tea into chipped mugs, "but it has room for those who need it." Aiden had curled on the sofa with Bandit, the dog stretched long across the rug, sighing contentedly as if he had at last found peace. But Eleanor knew she could not live on borrowed kindness forever. She needed to give Aiden more than shelter. She needed to show him that hope could be built again. The idea came quietly, almost like a prayer, when she walked past the abandoned basketball court behind the community center. The cracked asphalt, the rusting hoops, the weeds breaking through. It was wasted space, but sunlight pooled there each evening in long golden stripes. Aiden, who had been walking beside her, tugged her sleeve. "It looks like a place for stories," he whispered, his voice tentative but free of fear. And Eleanor realized it could be more than that. Within a week, townsfolk began to gather. At first only a handful. Letty with her sharp eyes, Dr. Caldwell with her quiet authority, Nora Pierce from CPS with her calm determination. Then more came, farmers in work boots, mothers with children tugging at their skirts, even shopkeepers who had once looked away when Michael passed. They brought what they could. Crates for benches, planks for tables, old books rescued from attics. Together they built something new, plank by plank, nail by nail, until a makeshift outdoor classroom stood beneath a cottonwood tree. They called it Sunset Yard. At dusk, when the desert sky burned orange and violet, the place glowed as though heaven itself leaned down to watch. A canvas tarp stretched overhead for shade, strings of small lamps dangled like fireflies, and the chalkboard leaned against the tree trunk bore the first words of a new beginning. Eleanor taught the children with patience, her green eyes alive with warmth, her auburn hair catching the light like copper threads. She wore no veil, no gown of lace, only simple cotton dresses that allowed her to move easily among the children. Bandit became the guardian of the yard. The German shepherd, now visibly graying around the muzzle, carried himself with quiet dignity. He patrolled the edges during lessons, ears twitching, tail swishing like a metronome of calm. When children hesitated to read aloud, he settled at their feet, and his mere presence made their voices steadier. The children loved him fiercely, stroking his sable fur, whispering secrets into his patient ears. On the evening of the dedication, the whole town gathered. The lamps glowed amber, casting halos across weathered faces and eager eyes. Eleanor stood at the front, holding Aiden's hand. She no longer wore the ring Michael had slipped on her finger. Instead, she wore a simple silver cross around her neck, its chain glinting in the firelight. Her voice, though quiet, carried across the benches. "This place," she said, gesturing to the wooden benches and chalkboard, "is not just for learning letters. It's for stitching what was torn, for giving children who were forgotten a place to be seen, to be safe." She squeezed Aiden's hand gently. "I promised God I would not let silence bind us again. So tonight, I make another promise. To be the mother who ties the right knots, the kind that hold, not hurt." A hush fell over the gathering. Aiden, small but no longer shrinking, stepped forward. His dark hair, once matted with fear, shone clean under the lamps. He clutched his small white stone, the talisman that had steadied him through nights of terror. His voice trembled but grew stronger with each word. "I don't sleep with pigs anymore," he said simply. "I'm not afraid now." Bandit gave a long, low sigh, his chest rising and falling in rhythm with the evening breeze. The sound rippled through the crowd, soft as a hymn. Tears glimmered in the eyes of more than one neighbor. Even Judge Alden had come, her silver hair catching the lantern light, her usually stern mouth softened by a rare smile. Dr. Caldwell stood nearby, her arms crossed, but her eyes tender. Nora Pierce took careful notes, her expression one of quiet pride. And so, under the golden lamps of Sunset Yard, a new kind of covenant was made. Not the broken vows of a marriage, but a bond between a woman, a child, and a town learning to open its eyes. Eleanor lifted her gaze heavenward, whispering a prayer of gratitude. The night air carried it like incense, weaving with the sound of laughter, the scratch of chalk on board, and the deep, steady breathing of a loyal dog. For the first time in years, Silver Mesa felt not divided by silence, but stitched together by courage, and in that moment, beneath the glow of lamps and the shimmer of stars, Eleanor believed that redemption had found its home. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder or lightning, but with the steady breath of a loyal dog, the trembling voice of a child who dares to speak, and the quiet strength of a woman who chooses love over fear. In Silver Mesa, what was broken became whole again, because light will always outlast the shadows. And maybe that is God's way of reminding us. He does not always move mountains with fire. Sometimes he heals hearts with courage, with truth, and with family. In our own lives, we all walk through valleys of doubt and silence, but there is always a hand waiting to guide us back, always a spark of grace ready to rise. Hold on to that hope. Protect the vulnerable. And never forget that love, when rooted in faith, can mend even the deepest wounds. If this story touched your heart, share it with others. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from, so we can see how far this message of love and courage will travel. And don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss the stories that remind us of God's miracles in everyday life. May the Lord bless you and keep you, now and always.